By the end of the Manchester match, most readers, and that's myself very much included, were convinced that Metavision was the absolute game changer for Blue Lock. That this one upgrade had transformed Isagi into a world-class player. But with the recent string of chapters, I've started to question this assumption. So this is the issue that I want to discuss today. How does Metavision fit within Blue Lock's overall narrative? And is Metavision really the be-all, end-all thing that we thought it was? Hello, my name is Sean, and from now on, this will be essentially a Blue Lock channel. So to start with, let's go back to the chapters where Metavision was first introduced and have a look at the promises that the manga made to us back then. During the first match of the Neo Egoist League, Isagi had been severely outclassed by Michael Kaiser. At this point, Kaiser basically embodied Isagi's ideal form, and Isagi needed to figure out how to close the gap between him and Kaiser. And this breakthrough came in the Manchester match, when he finally figured out Kaiser's secret. Kaiser uses his peripheral vision to observe the state of the playing field, and by doing so, he is able to process more information than anyone else, and to use that information to outmaneuver his opponents. Now, what's striking about the way that Metavision was introduced is that there's a stark disconnect between what seems to be a relatively mundane concept and its perceived impact. In reality, after all, Isagi's new skill is not much more than him paying more attention to his peripheral vision. In that sense, it's actually quite similar to the way he started taking his opponent's blind spots into account during the second selection. And yet, in terms of framing, Blue Lock showered this realization with an unprecedented amount of hype. Metavision is presented as this godlike ability, as the skill that will bring Isagi to the pinnacle of the football world. And it's not just Isagi's bias at play here either, because Noah as well has claimed that Isagi with this found his ticket to the very top. But with all this, the manga really hammers in the expectation that this is a watershed moment in Isagi's football career. This is the upgrade that will allow him to play on the same level as a pro like Kaiser. Now, it's highly significant that Isagi unlocked this ability specifically in the Manchester match. Manchester's football philosophy is all about optimizing their players' physical abilities and about finding strategies that build on their individual skill sets. So when Isagi eventually surpasses Manchester by combining his Metavision with the realization that every player views themselves as the protagonist of their own story, the manga makes it clear that a true egoist far surpasses even someone with the most impressive technical abilities. So now we've reached the next stage of the Neo Egoist League, and Bayern faces off against a team that relies on brain rather than brawn. And right here, we're shown that Isagi's ability is maybe not as potent as it may have first seemed. Most notably, Isagi is repeatedly shut down by Juventus's highly coordinated tactics. And this makes a lot of sense if you think about it. After all, Metavision only works if the user has time to take in the state of the playing field. So if his opponents don't give him time to process his surroundings, he can't anticipate the other player's moves. Isagi's struggles against Juventus also shed a light on why Metavision was so effective in the previous match. On a fundamental level, BM versus Manchester was a clash of egoists. Both Manchester and BM, or at least in the form as it was turned into by Blue Lock, so with the main players like Kaiser and Isagi and Kunigami, are collections of superstars who prioritize their own success and growth over the success of their team as a whole. So in that case, it wasn't that difficult for a single player to outwit all the other egoists around him. But now, it becomes apparent that you can't pull off the same tricks against a team that acts like a single organism. With their tactical, collaborative playstyle, Juventus can pull off things that a lone wolf like Isagi could never achieve. And more than that, I get the sense that Isagi is falling prey to the very biases he exploited in the Manchester match. Back then, the realization that everyone views themselves as the protagonist of their own story allowed him to surpass Kaiser for just a brief moment. It wasn't just that Isagi was seeing more than his rivals. He also took the other players' desires into account to crush his opponent's morale and to create chemical reactions with his teammates. But now, in the Juventus match, Snuffy manages to exploit Isagi's egoistical moves in the very same way that Isagi did of his opponents in Manchester. This time around, it's Isagi who is read like an open book by a more experienced player. At the same time, the Juventus match also repeatedly sheds light on the shortcomings of Metavision. This becomes most apparent in chapter 219, which is among my favorites in recent memory. First, we see Niko basking in his newfound Metavision. But right when he thought that he'd caught up with Isagi, it turns out that Isagi had nudged his opponent into narrowing his field of vision and let Raichi with that sneak up from Niko's blind spots. Yet, Isagi doesn't get the last laugh either. He in turn is outmaneuvered by comrade Oliver Aiku. In my view, this moment communicates two things. First of all, I do think that this is supposed to make Isagi seem a bit arrogant and hypocritical. Isagi scored a goal, felt like he was on top of the world, and underestimated his opponents as a result. Yet, at the same time, this moment shows that Metavision might also have more limits than we initially thought. Yes, compared to an average player, a Metavision user might seem like they're viewing the playing field from a higher dimension. But as it turns out, even a Metavision user can't escape the limitations of the human eye. Perhaps Niko could have understood that Isagi was misleading him, but in the end, you can only take in so much information at any given moment. After all, we just don't have 360-degree vision, or even actual vision from a higher dimension, right? Manga right now seems to be intent on showing us that there are ways around Metavision, that Isagi is not as omnipotent as he believed himself to be. And talking about Niko and Aiku, it's also noteworthy that we're now seeing members of the supporting cast unlocking Metavision. This is not to say that it doesn't make sense for them within their characters and established skill sets, because both of them have displayed similar spatial awareness as Isagi over the course of the story. Nevertheless, the increased amount of Metavision users does fundamentally alter our perception of this ability. Back when Metavision was first introduced, the manga presents it as the secret behind the success of one of the greatest upcoming football players. And so, Isagi acquiring Metavision was more than just any upgrade. The way the manga framed it, this was the moment where Isagi reached the tippy top of the football world. But now, it turns out that there are more people who can process information from their peripheral vision. While I personally don't really care exactly how big the gap is between, let's say, Niko and Kaiser, the point is that the manga never suggests that someone like Niko will ever approach Kaiser's level. In other words, the increased amount of Metavision users suggests that Metavision might be less important to Kaiser's success than we were first made to believe. In fact, this is exactly what the manga shows us with Kaiser's recent goal. Michael Kaiser didn't just outwit Isagi, he also scored a goal that no one else feasibly could have pulled off, right? So, to summarize. First, the manga implies that Isagi has closed the gap between himself and his rival by the way he scored the first goal of the match. Next, we're shown that Kaiser's secret ability might be less unique than we thought. But right then, Kaiser proves that he still has further tricks up his sleeve, and that Metavision is far from the only thing that places him among the world's rising stars. There's another thing I find striking about the sequence of events in the Juventus match as well. This relative devaluation of Metavision comes at the exact moment that Blue Lock puts another player who relies on his wits and perception in the spotlight. Once Snuffy enters the field, he surpasses Isagi's Metavision again and again. Even when it looks like Isagi has finally outsmarted Snuffy, it turns out that Snuffy had wrought a contingency plan for exactly that situation as well. But right now, Isagi keeps falling short of a player with similar specialties to himself. And not only that, Isagi himself expresses a desire to understand the workings of Snuffy's mind. To me, this all seems to suggest that there may be further layers yet to their style of tactical gameplay. In other words, Isagi acquiring Metavision may have been the watershed moment that elevated him to the top of the football world, but it's in no way the end point of his development. And I'm going to get a bit more speculative now, but when I was researching for this video, I was struck by the exchange between Isagi and Hiyori in chapter 208. When Isagi describes the workings of Metavision, Hiyori notes that Isagi has basically just leveled up his existing skill set, that he has undergone a steady, gradual process of growth, not a sudden awakening. In a way, this again makes Metavision feel just a tad less exciting than it did when it was first introduced. So with that, I can't help but wonder if this might be foreshadowing of sorts, that this might be an implicit promise that an even more spectacular upgrade is around the corner. And this is corroborated by the fact that Hiyori dropped this comment in the conversation where Isagi noted that he's still lacking something crucial to his scoring formula. Now, this conversation concludes with Isagi realizing that he could develop a left-legged shot as well. And when Isagi showcases this new ability, he indeed believes that this is his missing piece. Yet, the recent chapters have shown that Isagi's lefty shot alone, or at least in its current form, isn't enough to surpass Kaiser. I can't help but wonder if the lefty shot was in fact a red herring of sorts. Just like how Isagi thought that he finally found a way to shut down Snuffy, only to fall short a chapter later. So maybe in the scene with Hiyori too, Isagi was on the trail of something more fundamental, more closely related to his spatial awareness and vision. And the lefty shot was not the missing piece he was searching for. In any case, let me know your thoughts on the future of Metavision in the comments, and if you liked what you saw, do consider subscribing for more in-depth Blue Lock analysis every other week. And if you're interested in my thoughts on other series, go check out my second channel as well. There's a link in the description below.